80,000 Roman soldiers were wiped out in a single afternoon, and no one saw it coming. No tricks, no ambush, just one man who turned the greatest army in the world into a trap of their own making. Why did Rome fall for it? Why didn't Hannibal finish the war right then and there? This is the story behind the most perfect military disaster in history, the Battle of Cannae. But to understand how one man could pull that off, you have to start decades earlier. With a boy, a blood oath, and a father who didn't raise sons, he raised weapons. Forget what you think you know about childhood oaths. When 9-year-old Hannibal Barca swore at an altar to never befriend Rome, this wasn't some cute family tradition. This was psychological warfare disguised as parenting, and frankly, it worked better than anyone could have imagined. Most kids rebel by staying out past curfew. Hannibal decided to drag elephants across the Alps and terrorize the Mediterranean's greatest superpower. One can only imagine the sheer audacity it took to look at those mountain peaks and think, yes, this is where I'll march my war elephants. Let's be brutally honest here. The Second Punic War erupted when Hannibal attacked Saguntum in 218 BCE. Anyone telling you this was about trade disputes or political tensions is missing the point. This was the ancient equivalent of setting your neighbor's house on fire because you didn't like their fence, except the neighbor happened to be Rome. Instead of sailing like any rational military commander, Hannibal chose the Alps route. The reality was far uglier than any romanticized version you've heard. 50,000 soldiers and 37 war elephants trudging through winter mountain passes where death lurked behind every snowdrift. The logistics alone should have been impossible. Yet here we are, 2,000 years later, still trying to figure out how he pulled it off without GPS or weather forecasts. The crossing was a nightmare that would make modern special forces weep. Snow, ice, hostile tribes picking off stragglers, and the constant specter of avalanches. Many elephants died in ways that would traumatize Disney animators, but Hannibal's core fighting force emerged intact and absolutely murderous. At Trebia and Lake Trasimene, Hannibal didn't just defeat Roman armies, he systematically butchered them with tactical precision that bordered on artistry. Romans suddenly realized they weren't facing some barbarian chief with daddy issues. This was strategic brilliance wrapped in calculated brutality that would make Machiavelli take notes. Forget the Hollywood version. Instead of marching straight to Rome like some testosterone-fueled conqueror, Hannibal played psychological chess across Italy. Each victory brought more cities to his side, proving Rome could bleed. The propaganda value was devastating and deliberate, but Rome's response would show just how dangerously stubborn empires can be when cornered. Rome's solution to the Hannibal problem was beautifully Roman in its breathtaking arrogance. Throw more soldiers at it than anyone had ever seen. 86,000 men. Let me put this in perspective for you. More troops than most ancient civilizations could muster if they emptied every village, farm, and tavern from here to the edge of the known world. The Romans essentially decided to bring a sledgehammer to swat a fly, except the fly turned out to be a military genius with a psychology degree and a serious grudge. 2 consuls commanded this monster army, alternating leadership daily like some twisted game of musical chairs. Anyone telling you this was brilliant strategy clearly hasn't spent 5 minutes studying military disasters. Nothing screams tactical genius quite like changing your commanding officer based on a calendar rather than, actual battlefield conditions. The Roman plan was charmingly direct in its stupidity. Form up in traditional legions and steamroll Hannibal's smaller force through sheer overwhelming numbers. Crush them with mathematical superiority. The plan seemed foolproof to minds that had never encountered real tactical innovation, which tells you everything about Roman military thinking. Let's be brutally honest about Roman confidence levels. They were stratospheric to the point of delusion. They had numerical superiority, better equipment, and centuries of military dominance backing them up. Previous enemies had crumbled before such overwhelming force like wheat before a scythe. The Romans probably thought they were facing the ancient equivalent of a pickup team made up of guys who couldn't even agree on which language to speak, let alone coordinate an attack. Hannibal's mixed coalition of Gauls, Spaniards, and Libyans looked pathetic by Roman standards. Different tribes, different fighting styles, different languages, different gods. Victory seemed so certain that Roman senators were probably already planning victory parades and dividing up the spoils. The reality was far more complicated and infinitely more dangerous. Hannibal had spent years studying Roman tactics with the dedication of a scholar and the patience of a predator, learning their strengths, weaknesses, and most importantly, their arrogance. But tactical genius was about to collide head-on with tactical arrogance, and the results would be spectacular. Hannibal surveyed his 50,000 troops facing 86,000 Romans and did something that would have gotten most generals court-martialed for insanity. He smiled. Let's be absolutely clear about what happened next, because this is where military history gets genuinely terrifying. The center of his line got his weakest troops, positioned exactly where Romans would hit hardest with maximum fury. It's like putting your worst poker players in charge of the biggest pot and telling them to lose convincingly, except the stakes were the future of two civilizations and everyone was holding actual swords. Anyone telling you this strategy was simple hasn't grasped the psychological torture involved. It required his Gallic and Spanish troops to fight desperately, retreat convincingly, and die in exactly the right way at exactly the right time. Their controlled retreat had to look real enough to fool seasoned Roman commanders while maintaining enough cohesion to avoid total collapse. One miscalculation and the entire army would disintegrate. His secret weapons, Libyan heavy infantry, waited on both flanks slightly behind the action like coiled springs. These were battle-hardened professionals who could gut a man in 12 different ways, but Romans couldn't see them clearly through Hannibal's careful positioning. Think of it as hiding your best chess pieces while your opponent obsesses over capturing pawns, except the pawns were actual human beings bleeding out on the ground. Spanish cavalry took the left wing, Numidians the right. Each unit had specific timing requirements that would either create the perfect trap or result in total annihilation. There was no middle ground, no room for error, no plan B. Hannibal's center bulged forward like a drawn bow under maximum tension. When Romans charged, this line would bend backward, drawing the enemy deeper into what they thought was victory. The illusion had to be flawless because Roman generals weren't idiots, just arrogant. The whole plan was essentially an ancient version of letting burglars into your house so you could lock every exit behind them, except the burglars numbered 86,000 and carried professional weapons. One can only imagine the iron discipline required to execute this choreography while watching friends die around you. Everything depended on timing that would make Swiss watchmakers weep with envy and precision that modern militaries still struggle to achieve. The Romans marched straight into the most elegant death trap ever conceived by human minds. Roman infantry slammed into Hannibal's center with the force of 80,000 angry men seeking vengeance. The Gallic and Spanish line fought desperately, but began falling back step by step. To Roman eyes, this looked exactly like the beginning of victory. Roman generals probably started composing their triumph speeches while their soldiers were still busy dying in what they thought was a successful advance. Forget what you think you know about military retreats. This wasn't panic or collapse. This was choreographed death on an industrial scale. As the center fell back, it formed a concave death bowl facing the Roman advance. The massive Roman formation compressed into an increasingly tight space as they pursued what appeared to be a broken enemy. Imagine 80,000 people trying to squeeze through a funnel simultaneously, except everyone outside the funnel wants them dead. Then Hannibal's Libyan heavy infantry struck from both flanks with the precision of a closing bear trap. These fresh, elite troops hit Roman sides while Romans remained fixated on their supposed breakthrough. The surprise was complete and devastating. The Roman formation imploded. Soldiers in the rear kept pushing forward while the front ranks found themselves unable to advance or retreat. Disciplined legion formations devolved into a chaotic mass of bodies pressed so tightly that weapons became useless. Panic spread faster than wildfire. And if you think this tactical masterpiece was impressive, wait until you see what happens next. But first, if you're enjoying these unvarnished historical truths that textbooks won't tell you, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, there's plenty more brutal reality where this came from. Hannibal's cavalry completed the masterpiece by swinging around to attack from behind. Now Romans were surrounded on all sides with zero escape routes. Picture being trapped in the world's deadliest elevator, except everyone outside is professionally trained to kill you and the elevator keeps shrinking. 80,000 Romans packed into space, designed for 20,000, unable to fight effectively, unable to retreat, taking casualties from every conceivable direction. The slaughter was about to begin in earnest. It makes you wonder how anyone survived to tell this story. The numbers from Cannae defy belief, even by ancient standards of brutality. Around 80,000 Romans died in a single afternoon on that blood-soaked field. Let's be clear about the scale. More Romans died at Cannae than Americans died in the entire Vietnam War, except this Holocaust happened in roughly 6 hours. The killing was so methodical and efficient that military academies still study it as the gold standard of tactical annihilation. Both Roman consuls met appropriately different fates. One died fighting in the chaos like a proper Roman. The other fled the field and spent the rest of his life explaining why abandoning 80,000 men was somehow strategic. Running away from history's most complete military disaster isn't exactly the kind of experience that builds political careers. 80 senators perished, either in battle or shortly after from wounds. These weren't expendable foot soldiers. These were Rome's political elite who had expected to return home as conquering heroes. The political earthquake was immediate and catastrophic. Around 10,000 Romans became prisoners. Hannibal's casualties, roughly 6,000 men. The math is brutal. One Carthaginian died for every 13 Romans killed. Frankly, even for an unvarnished historian like myself, such efficiency seems almost impossible without modern weapons. Rome's response revealed the depth of their panic. The Senate banned public mourning because they feared the entire city would collapse into despair. When your government has to legally prohibit grief, you know civilization is hanging by a thread. The psychological damage cut deeper than the military losses. For the first time in centuries, Romans faced the terrifying possibility that their empire might be mortal. It's like discovering your favorite superhero bleeds just like everyone else, except the consequences involve the fate of the Mediterranean world. Anyone telling you Rome took this defeat in stride hasn't read the historical accounts of mass hysteria that followed. But here's where Hannibal's story takes its strangest turn. After orchestrating the most complete military annihilation in recorded history, Hannibal made a decision that still baffles historians. He didn't march on Rome. His cavalry commander reportedly told him he knew how to win battles, but not how to exploit victory. That's ancient military criticism at its most cutting, essentially calling your commanding officer a tactical genius and strategic moron in the same breath. Let's be clear about Hannibal's reasoning. His army lacked siege equipment for attacking heavily fortified cities. His supply lines were dangerously overstretched after years of campaigning in hostile territory. But the real calculation was psychological. He expected Rome to sue for peace after losing 80,000 soldiers. Any rational civilization would have thrown in the towel after watching their largest army get methodically butchered in an afternoon. Rome was not rational. Instead of negotiating, Rome doubled down with the kind of stubborn determination that built empires. They adopted a strategy of deliberate avoidance while slowly rebuilding their strength. The Romans essentially became that persistently annoying opponent who keeps jabbing you but runs away every time you swing back. Except this strategy actually worked. Hannibal spent the next 13 years wandering Italy like a deadly ghost, winning smaller engagements but never achieving another Cannae. Meanwhile, Rome raised fresh armies and learned from their catastrophic mistakes. They refused to give Hannibal the decisive battle he desperately needed. The war became a grinding test of endurance. One can only imagine Hannibal's frustration as his perfect victory slowly turned into strategic irrelevance. The war eventually shifted to Africa when Roman forces attacked Carthage directly, forcing Hannibal to abandon Italy and surrender all his hard-won gains. Rome had turned Hannibal's greatest strength, his patience, into a liability by simply refusing to quit when any sane civilization would have surrendered. The impact of that single afternoon would outlast the war itself. Cannae became the tactical holy grail that every general afterward tried desperately to recreate, usually with catastrophic results. Napoleon studied this battle obsessively during his campaigns, probably muttering Hannibal's name in his sleep. German generals used similar encirclement tactics in World War II with devastating results that made headlines for all the wrong reasons. Military academies still teach Cannae like it's the Mona Lisa of warfare, except instead of paint and canvas, the medium was human blood, and the canvas was a battlefield littered with 80,000 corpses. The double envelopment maneuver became known as the Cannae maneuver, appearing throughout history whenever commanders possessed enough skill, luck, and sheer audacity to execute it properly. Most attempts failed spectacularly, which tells you something about the genius required and the arrogance of those who tried. But here's the brutal irony that makes this story perfect for an unvarnished historian. Despite achieving tactical perfection that military scholars still worship, Hannibal lost the war. Rome recovered, adapted, and eventually erased Carthage so completely that we're still digging up ruins just to remember it existed. Hannibal won the most famous battle in military history, but still ended up as history's most successful failure, which should tell you something about the difference between winning battles and winning wars. Let's be brutally honest. Cannae taught Rome lessons that transformed their military forever. They developed flexible formations, professional logistics, and armies that could adapt to different enemies and situations. The disaster made Rome stronger, more resilient, and ultimately unstoppable. Sometimes the best teacher is getting your teeth kicked in by someone better than you. The battle highlighted the crucial difference between tactical brilliance and strategic victory that most people completely miss. Winning one battle spectacularly means absolutely nothing if you can't win the war. Rome's ability to absorb catastrophic losses and continue fighting ultimately proved more valuable than any single tactical masterpiece, no matter how perfect. Military historians still debate whether Hannibal made the right choice by not attacking Rome immediately after Cannae, and frankly, they'll be arguing about it until the sun burns out. What nobody debates is the lasting impact of that afternoon when one man showed the world that overwhelming numbers mean nothing against superior tactics and proper preparation. And there you have it, the raw truth behind how one man and 50,000 soldiers engineered the most devastating military collapse Rome ever faced. But now that you've seen how it happened, do you think Hannibal should have marched on Rome or was holding back the smarter move? Let me know in the comments. And if you're into history with blood under its fingernails, hit subscribe, because the next story might be even darker.